Hello YouTube. It might be a bit hard to believe, especially if you spend a lot of time on YouTube Fitness or surrounded with people who have a like-minded approach to training, but there exist some men on this planet who believe that they are too smart to lift. And I've been exposed to this type my entire life. It's always been a mindfuck to me. I never could quite understand where they were coming from, even though at some point I was exactly like them. So what I want to do today is I want to take a good look at these people and answer the following question. Is it possible to be too smart to lift? It's been a very long time since I made that type of philosophical video, so you already know it's going to be very long. I recommend that, just like I did, you grab yourself a drink, you sit tight and comfortably, and we're going to get started, because the goal of today's video is to try and explain the reason why these people think this way and the impact that this mindset has had on modern men. Because I've come to the conclusion, again, after gathering my thoughts on this phenomenon, that it is responsible for the slow regression of humanity into mediocrity. So as I said, this is going to be free-flowing. I have some notes to make sure that I don't waste your time. But I'm mostly going to base my argument off of three pieces of media that you might have been exposed to at some point because they perfectly represent the too smart to lift mindset. And the very first of them that I'm going to be basing the first half of this video on is the following tweet that appears on your screen right now. I'm going to attempt to read it and mimic the intonation and the vibe of the person who wrote this. The author is named Goopy. I quote, "Each large muscle of a bodybuilder represents a language he didn't learn, a poem he didn't read, a fun fact he never memorized." So this one has made the round on fitness forums in particular because it pissed a lot of people off. But why is this tweet so annoying? Well, it's because, of course, it presents bodybuilders as idiots who are wasting their time. The very practice of fitness and lifting weight is presented as a waste of time. But why? Well, it's because in the tweet, this person presents the idea that trying to put on muscle is vain because it has no real application, whereas you could be doing better things with your time, like reading poems or memorizing fun facts. Now, if you were to ask me, or anyone who trains right now, what is the most important thing between memorizing fun facts about Star Wars that you can repeat at a shitty party you go to, or training your body, the answer would be evident. It would be training your body. But clearly for that individual, it's not evident at all. It's actually quite the opposite. So how is this possible? Well, it's because we're dealing with someone who doesn't train. If you have never tasted what it's like to push yourself physically, you can never really put a value on it, and therefore it's not surprising that someone like this would exist. The question is, how come so many men like this exist? How is it possible that so many men have never tasted the fire of lifting and are therefore putting the priority on things that we lifters consider to be completely idiotic? Well, the answer to me is a philosophy that has invaded the modern world, and that is the philosophy of mind-body dualism. Mind and body dualism is the idea that the mind and body are distinct. And what ends up happening when you separate two entities like this is that one is going to become more important than the other. Naturally, you're going to start favoring one. And the one that this modern world and these people have started to favor is, of course, the intellect. It is the brain. They have pushed the body aside because they have come to believe that you do not need to develop the two at the same time. You can just pick and choose. And it starts very young. Mind-body dualism is promoted by the school system, and it started a long time ago. I'm not going to go into the history of the philosophy, but Christianity was a big proponent of the idea that the body was impure and needed to be pushed aside, and you must focus on the soul and the spirit because that is what is going to survive death. Even in a quote-unquote atheist society nowadays, this idea still survives. And if you look at the school system, you get to see that clearly. Look at the amount of time kids spend developing their brain, learning new things, and look at the amount of time they spend actually working on their body. I remember that to me, I had 2 hours of PE a week, and that was it. I spent 30 hours with my ass sat on a chair learning about things I never used in reality, but developing the body, it was just a complete afterthought. Why? Because as a society, as humans, we have started to neglect the body. Worse, we have started to think that working on the body is almost a vulgar thing. These types are just applying that very same mindset. When they put down the practice of lifting weights or training or fitness in general, they're just repeating what the school told them, because society as a whole is telling them that they are right, that developing the body is just a waste of time. Now, how did we get to this? Why is developing the body a waste of time nowadays? Well, it's because it aligns perfectly with what the system wants. The system at this point in time does not need people who are physically capable. We have machines for that. We have replaced the need for physical activity by the intense activity of machines. And so, as a system that needs workers, since there is no need for physical workers, or at least not as much as in the past, the system tries to create drones that are mostly mentally endurance, which is why the school puts you through 30 hours of just repetitive nonsense all the time, because it is what your adult life is going to look like as well. Most likely that is going to be your job. What I call a post-physical society, where most jobs just require you to sit down and type. So the education system, of course, also adapts to it. Now, the question that follows is it to our benefit? Is this system created to better the life of human? Some people would tell you that yes, because blue-collar jobs are very difficult. You can have back injuries, you can hurt your shoulder, you're not as likely to live as long, etc. I personally disagree with that notion. I think that the physical activity that was brought forth by a world without machines benefited humans because it fought this mind and body dualism. The mind and the body were connected together. Nowadays, we have went way too far. Just because you do not need to be physical in your job does not mean that your health doesn't need you to be physical. I'm what they call a desk jockey. I work at a desk. I work in AI. None of that is physical. Okay, I don't pick up the machines and overhead press them. And yet I still develop my body with rigor. Why? Because my job is not giving me what is needed for my body to be healthy. They say that sitting on a chair is the fastest way to die an early death, and that is true. Not because sitting is a bad thing, but that only sitting and never being physically active is going to eventually lead to an early death, because your muscles are going to atrophy and your system, your body in general, the machine that is your body, is going to shut down at some point, much earlier than if you were working on it. Which is paradoxical, because we invented machines to do the work for us, which eventually led to the machine that is our bodies breaking down much earlier than it would if the machines were not actually in our lives. And this apparently completely escapes these so-called intellectuals. So the guy in the tweet I just cited apparently doesn't understand that. He doesn't understand that, yes, we put in hours to develop our bodies for the sake of our mind, because it's going to allow the mind to preserve itself and to remain in a body that is healthy. The body cannot separate itself from the mind and vice versa. If your body dies, your mind dies as well, until we create a solution where we can just extract the mind, but that is not a reality yet. But these types apparently ignore that entirely, and they treat their body just like a vessel. It's this idea of pure spirit, right? This idea that if you focus entirely on the mind and the soul, and you push away the body and the vulgarity of the body and the need for food or sex, for example, or libido, you are going to be able to transcend your condition as a human. Because, again, you're separating yourself from the primal and animalistic portion of you. The body is it's like a beast, it's like a wild beast, and the brain containing it is the angelic part. It's the part most connected to God and to the intellect. So, if you can let the body die, if you can actually help the body perish, you would be able to transcend the mind. I also disagree with that notion entirely. To me, it's the exact opposite. A mind stuck in an inactive body eventually rots away, mostly because it is disconnected from nature or the physical realm, whatever you want to call it. And this is why the Greek philosophers, and many philosophers afterwards, insisted on the necessity to stay physically active and to walk as much as possible. It's what we call in French les péripatéticiens, the peripatetic school of thought. Ancient Greeks thought that it was very healthy to go walk in nature. Why? So that you could get the body and the mind in touch with reality. Because at the end of the day, what is thinking? Thinking is reasoning by trying to understand the reality around you. So if you try to disconnect yourself from that reality, you are just impairing your ability to understand said reality. So you are also hurting your intellect. It is directly detrimental. There is a quote that I actually really like that also comes from that time. I forget the name of the person who produced it. But it's a quote that goes, societies that separate its scholars from its warriors will have its thinking done by cowards and its fighting done by force. Now, the person doing the fighting and the person doing the thinking, in my opinion, are the same. What this quote is in reality trying to transmit in terms of idea is that if you try to create a society that is hyper-focused on one or the other, you end up with neither. Because to have both at a very high level, you need both at a very high level. You need both to be extremely developed. So that's a quote that I would like you to meditate on, because it also connects with this ancient mindset that was popularized by people like Aristotle or Xenophon, who believed that if you were a man, you could not be considered complete, so you could not be called a man in reality, if you didn't work on both the body and the mind on a daily basis. And that is shocking for many people, because nowadays when you think philosopher, you think someone who's scrawny, maybe who is not really keeping care of themselves. And that is, again, this idea of a pure spirit, who have bought into the idea that to be extremely smart, you must be someone who is very physically inept. The Greek philosophers did not believe in that at all. They all trained their body regularly. We have many testimonies of these people of the past who are extremely physically fit. Plato was also someone who was deemed an actual beast, because keep in mind that Plato wasn't his actual name. Plato means wide shoulders, so most likely it was a nickname. Nietzsche himself, who was very physically sick, who had a very serious disease, was walking every day for hours, even with his disease. Why? Because he believed that his best ideas came to him when he was being physically active in connection with reality. So this is the first part of this tweet and the first part of the argument that makes little sense. There is a reason why people throughout the ages have always, and men especially, focused on being physically active. It's because if you do not do that, you are losing part of what it means to be a man. Again, another infamous quote, this time by Socrates: no man has the right to be an amateur in the matter of physical training. Was Socrates trying to convey by this that if you don't have big biceps, you're a piece of shit? No, what he meant is that you're not complete because you're literally completely ignoring 50% of what you are. And this evident wisdom of the ancient philosophers must make a comeback, because as I said, our modern system, the education system, and the modern idea of what it means to be human has lost that. You're born with a body, but how many people train their body? How many people spend a lot of time training their mind, or at least they claim to, and spend 0 hours on the body? Well, sadly, too many. And that is because I believe that our modern approach is what I call an RPG approach. Anyone who has ever played an RPG knows that when you level up your character, you can enter points, you can select characteristics that you can level up with the points that you gain when you gain a level. It can be intelligence, it can be luck, it can be dexterity, it can be agility, it can be strength, it can be vitality, etc., etc. For humans, we have these stats as well, and the main ones would be intelligence and physicality. Sadly, nowadays, the vast majority of society invest all of their points in intellect, because there is quote-unquote no need for physicality. So if you are playing, I don't know, like Dark Souls, and you're about to do a run, and you know that most of the bosses are weak to magic, you're not going to put your points into strength, you're going to put them into intelligence to have stronger spells. It's the same with society. Because society is now skewed entirely towards the mental, why would you spend time and waste time on the physical? This is what has led us to an hyper-specialization. Humans have always been specialists. It's actually what makes us great. It's because we specialized mostly for dexterity, but also for communication, of course. All of these things that make us the apex species, as you've come to understand. The dominant species on this planet is not the polar bear, it is not the lion, it is not the gorilla, it's not the strongest species at all, it's us. We would be destroyed by these animals in any physical competition, and yet we dominate them effortlessly because we prioritized in certain aspects that paid off tremendously, whereas they never actually did that. And it's a trade that is mostly dexterity for brute strength. So in the past, it is believed at least that our ancestors were much more physically apt, but they had less dexterity. And to be able to create tools, to be able to create technology, we traded that. And this trade is still ongoing nowadays. It's going extremely slow, of course, because evolution is extremely slow. But what I want to focus on right now is the impact that our current trajectory is going to have in the future. Because it is very likely that, again, we are going to stay on the same path. And the question is this a good thing? Are the people like the guy in this tweet correct that it would be a good idea to stop putting points in strength entirely and to just spend all of these points in intellect? Well, if you look at the way humans depict their evolutions, or at least more advanced species, you come to understand that most people believe that, yes, it would be the right idea. And I would like to point out, to demonstrate this theory that I have, the way we represent aliens. So this video, as you come to understand, is going to be all over the place. But I hope you're having a good time, because I am having a very good time. So these are things that have always been in my head, and I love sharing them with you guys. I think it's a privilege that I have to be able to talk to so many people. So aliens, how do we represent aliens? Aliens are supposed to be more advanced than us. Okay, that is an acquired truth. How do we represent them? Are they 8 feet tall with massive biceps and big torsos? No, they're short, they have small limbs, very important, small bodies, and big heads. Their heads are much bigger than the rest of their body. Most of their body mass is in their heads. What exactly is that representing? It is representing a species that stopped investing in the physical entirely because it believed that the intellectual and mental would eventually become so potent that it would replace the physical. This is why some of these creatures have telekinesis. They have the ability to move things with their mind. This is the purest application of what I just described. You become so intelligent that the intelligence replaces the physical because now you have no need for muscles. Your mind can move objects. Now, whether you believe in aliens or not doesn't matter. What matters to me is this. In the collective imagination of humans, this is how aliens are represented 100% of the time. So we have accepted as a species that our current trajectory is the correct one and that we must continue until the body literally dies. Because the body of aliens is a dead item. It is completely useless. Most of them don't even need it to move around. Again, in the collective representations, they are pure spirits. Aliens are quite literally pure spirits. Are we going to end up like the aliens? And is it really what we want? Is it really what we should be aiming at? And most importantly, are we actually doing it? If we continue the way we are we going to become the aliens or are we going to become something else? Are men who neglect physical strength really going to end up being more capable because they're more intelligent than people like me who train on a daily basis? Well, of course, you've seen the title and you have come to understand at this point that the answer is going to be no. My point is that no, our current method is not going to get us there. Our current method will just make us regress. It will never lead to progression. Why? Because to me, the RPG approach is wrong. And it is wrong on two aspects. The first is because humans cannot max out one stat. If you've played Dofus or other types of RPGs, you understand that there is a cap to the stats. So let's say you put 200 points in intelligence. Now for every point you put in, you have to put 2 points in to get 1 point of intelligence. It is the idea of diminished returns. It's the exact same with humans. You cannot just ignore all of the other stats and just spam intelligence. At some point, it stops working because the cap that we have as humans is called stamina. Humans have two types of stamina. We have physical stamina and we have intellectual or mental stamina. These staminas mean that if you work, let's say, on an opera piece or you work on writing a paper, at some point your brain is going to stop being able to focus. You have spent all of your mental stamina. Does it mean that you depleted your physical stamina? No, because there are different entities that allow you to put points in different categories. So essentially, if you're someone who only trains the brain and thinks, oh, because I don't train the body, I have more points for the brain. Wrong. There are different staminas. The only thing you're doing is that you're wasting away your physical stamina because you are not using it. So it would be the equivalent again of having a Dark Souls run and you have 500 pounds of souls to distribute throughout your characteristics. and you put 200 in intelligence, and you have 200 left that can only be put in strength, and you refuse to put them there because you think it's going to get you more intelligence points, but it won't. They will just be wasted away. That is exactly how humans function. And even worse than that, I've come to believe that mental and physical stamina are linked in the recovery aspects, meaning that as someone who develops both, because I try to be a complete man, I've found that training the body, depleting physical stamina, allows my mental stamina to come back faster, because it's like a form of meditation. And the opposite is also true. If I train my body really hard and then I spend some time reading, my entire body is so focused on the mental stamina I'm spending that my physical stamina is completely free to replenish. So the recovery aspect is boosted both ways, which is why most of the time, a man who reads or does something intellectual five hours a day and then spends 2 hours training the body is going to be more efficient than someone who spent 7 hours doing something intellectual, because at some point, again, there is a diminished return. You are not able to put your best effort forward, and this is when you need to diversify, move on to the physical, move on to the mental. Most likely, with this first thing I just described, this means that people who refuse to work on their body actively lower their intellect because they lower their ability to utilize their mental stamina. And then there's the second part, the second reason why the path that we're taking nowadays, when we put all of the points into intellect, won't work. And that is because we exist in the physical world. If you look at aliens and their supposed existence and their environment, where do aliens exist? They exist in either the fourth dimension, or they exist in a world where the physical doesn't matter anymore. But that is not our case. We have gravity, we have the real world, we have illnesses, and there's danger around you, dangers that you can defend yourself with your body. So if you ignore entirely the body and the mind is put in danger, how are you supposed to defend it? You don't have telekinesis, you don't have psychic powers. So by not developing the body, you left the mind undefended for the day where it will need the body to defend itself. Which begs the following question. If the men who are anti-fitness and who hate bodybuilding and lifting are so intelligent, why can't they figure this out? How couldn't the guy from the tweet figure out the simple explanation I presented to you guys? Why are some men so anti-fitness? Well, I think that the answer here, and in many cases it is that answer, is resentment. These are people who are not actually thinking logically. They are thinking emotionally. They feel some sort of way about what they did to their own body, and they feel an intense form of jealousy and envy towards people like me or you who develop their body, who are into fitness. So how do they cope? Well, they could cope if they were actually intelligent by looking back and thinking, okay, I might have messed up and I should actually start to invest in the body. No, what these people do instead is, because they feel physically inferior to you and they know it, they try to compensate, it's a form of psychological compensation, by claiming to be intellectually superior. So in a sense, they double down. They fucked up by only investing in intellect, and when faced with that reality, they try to cling onto it and claim that it was the right choice in the first place. This is a very common mindset and a very common psychological weakness that many men have nowadays. If we were to try and figure out where that comes from, I think that I am a good resource for the simple reason that I was like this. When I was a kid, I was like this. I was extremely intellectual, but I was a complete wimp. My body was useless in reality. I was very skinny. I had no stamina whatsoever because I never partook in sports. I was reading all the time, but I never developed the body. And so I was, of course, very resentful towards younger boys, young men my age, who were working on the body. And the way I made myself feel better about that was the fact that I told myself that these men were stupid. They were monkeys, right? They were just walking around and doing all of that soccer stuff, and they were doing pull-ups or whatever. I was so much superior to them because I, the intellectual, only focused on developing my mind. So of course I was better. And then reality came knocking, like this, and was like, hey, you see that mind that you are so proud of? What if that kid that is arguably stupider than you decided to just swing a baseball bat at your face and shatter your brain? What then? What good is all of your intelligence if a complete idiot can just take it away? Well, that's something that knock on the door is called bullying. I was bullied by kids who hated me because I was smarter than them, and I hated them and I resented them because they were stronger than me. And they taught me a very valuable lesson. They taught me that I was wasting my life away and that I had to start toughening myself up, because if I didn't, I would get bullied for the rest of my life. Many of the men, like the guy in the tweet, are people like this. They were victimized physically by someone or something in their life, but instead of learning a lesson like I did and toughening up and becoming strong, they doubled down. That's what I just explained previously. When you make a mistake, you have two choices: correct it or double down. These people doubled down because they thought, well, it's not my fault. It's these idiotic monkeys that are bullying me for no reason. No, there is a reason. I've explained it in the past in my bullying video. They are agents of chaos and they are agents of nature. They remind you of what must be done for your survival. But these types refuse to hear it. So what they do usually is double down on their nerd status. So they make being a nerd their entire personality, which in reality means that they make weakness and they make the absence of physical strength their entire personality. Always keep in mind, weakness can never be a strength, and your identity is supposed to be a strength. This is, in a sense, their attempt at hiding away in the spiritual world. A lot of these kids, and again, I was one of them, who spend their time playing card games, who spend their time playing video games or reading books or LARPing. What is this? What is LARPing? All of these hobbies are attempts at removing yourself from the physical world and hiding away in the spiritual world. Does it work? Yes, it works as escapism for an instant, but it doesn't remove the physical body from the physical realm, because unless you die, you cannot remove yourself from the physical realm. And at some point, you have to face that reality. But if you spend enough time with these escapist methods, the body withers away and dies. The body starts becoming more and more useless. So by trying to run away from the physical, you make yourself even more of a victim for the physical, which is tragic because, again, most of the time, these things happen in childhood. They're easily fixable. But if you double down and you make that mistake, they can follow you for the rest of your life. And I know men who have been bullied for a year when they were 12, and every single year of their life afterwards was just as miserable because they made that year the defining factor of their life and identity going forward. So that is usually what happens with these men. This is their psychological portrait. Or these could also be men who have never actually been physically bullied. It's paradoxical, but both an excess of violence or an absence of it can turn you into a physical shut-in. Either because, again, you resent that violence and you run away from it, or because you've never been exposed to it, so you think it doesn't exist. I also know men like this, men who have never been slapped, punched, and who think that this world and this life is this perfect paradise where violence doesn't exist yet. They're wrong, of course, but they don't know that. So they can just put all of their points in the spiritual and the intellectual world because they think the physical world doesn't exist. But it does, and when it hits them in the face, again, it's the equivalent of if you have a character with 1,000 intelligence and 0 force and vitality, and you face a boss that is immune to magic. The boss is going to one-shot you, okay? It's the same with life. This is where this resentment comes from, because at some point, or even deep down throughout their life, these men have understood why they behave like this, why they spend so much time in the spiritual realm. It's because the physical world victimizes them. They don't like that, so they run away. But since they exist in the physical, they can never detach themselves from the shame and from the resentment that it is to exist in the physical world as a weakling. This is why strength as a man is not only an important physical trait to possess, it's also vital in terms of psychology. To stay mentally healthy as a man, you need to be strong. Because if you're not, you're going to start resenting your very life. You're going to start detesting existence as a whole, because every single second of it is going to remind you that you are useless and you are a complete victim. Since these men refuse to fix it, as I said, what they do is they try to feel better about themselves by putting down the very thing that would make them feel better. This is dangerous, psychologically speaking. When you have a feeling of inferiority, the only way to fix it is to fix the inferiority. You cannot fix the thing that makes you feel inferior, if that makes sense. So if you see a strong man and you think, okay, it makes me feel some sort of way, it makes me feel bad, there are two solutions. Either you become stronger, or you try to convince yourself that the strong man in front of you is actually the idiot in the scenario. Which one do you think actually makes you feel better down the line? It's mimicking this, because you clearly envy that trait, and so it would be the only way for you to feel better. But because these men never did that, and they still feel the intense need to cope and to feel better, what they do instead is they make up reasons, because they can't outright state that they do so out of jealousy. Which explains why the arguments are so stupid. Any of you who read that tweet in 20 seconds could come out to the same conclusions as I did and realize that none of it is actual solid arguments. All of these arguments are purely illogical because they're all deeply rooted in emotion. And this is why I was saying previously that it is impossible to claim that putting all of your points in intellect would make you more intelligent, because if you do so as a man, you're going to start to resent your lack of physicality, which in turn is going to turn your precious intellect into emotional responses. And because these men are in a constant state of emotion, because their mediocrity makes them emotional, then they can also be claimed to be intellectually mediocre all the time. And the proof is with the person that made this tweet. You know me, I'm extremely nosy and I'm curious. So I dug up some information on the guy, and what I found did not surprise me. This is a guy who is a failed writer, so he's one of the many men who thought that because they could string two words together, their calling was in writing. I read most of his work, it is garbage. He's also that type of dude, and I met many of them because I'm in the same social class, who is upper middle class, with sort of well-off parents or parents that do okay for themselves. He was lucky enough to receive a correct education, and he realized at a young age that he was slightly smarter than the average person like I did, and it went straight to his head. Well, now, the way he writes like an aristocrat, but the issue is that this is not based on actual intellect, it's based on ego, which is why I find it extremely paradoxical, because keep in mind that his argument for the most part is that bodybuilding is vain because developing your muscles does nothing, yet this is someone who exists entirely out of vanity. Now, we'll get back to the question of vanity because you'll see that vanity for the most part stems from a feeling of inferiority, but this is something I'm going to demonstrate later. To go back to the author again, I read that he apparently struggles to learn Spanish. I don't know if my Spanish audience is going to agree with me, but Spanish is fairly easy to learn, especially if you already speak a Latin language. So overall, we have a portrait of someone that puts down physicality and that deems themselves intellectually superior for it, but who demonstrates all of the writings of someone who is intellectually mediocre, barely better than average. And that is because, in conclusion, and to repeat what I already said, giving up on your body makes your mind less efficient because you're not anchored in reality anymore, and you end up living a life of compensation, which takes you away from the intellectual realm and makes you a creature of emotions. And now we're going to move on to the second piece of media I want to share with you guys, where I'm going to focus much more on this idea of jealousy. The jealousy that non-fit individuals, non-fit men, feel towards muscular men. I think it's going to be very relevant to your particular scenario and situation because the bulkier you get, the bigger you get, the more you're going to be targeted by weak men who are going to try and utilize certain psychological strategies to make you feel bad. And it's going to be very important for you to understand where this comes from so that you can resist it and never become like them, but also fire back at them and maybe better their life. So I selected the following comic because it represents that perfectly. And again, I'm going to give you a dramatic reading. So the first panel shows a girl that looks crazy in love, and she's looking at a bodybuilder. And the l'entête states, people don't look at a ripped guy and think, wow, this guy is so strong. He must be some kind of warrior chieftain. What a great guy. Then we move on to the second panel, and it says, nope, we think, oh, that guy spends a lot of time in the gym. Third panel enters. And if we're being judgmental, we might think, oh, that guy's life must be pretty damn boring if he can devote so much of it to lifting pieces of metal. And then the fourth panel comes in and a new character introduces itself, and the character is a stand-in for the author. Please note the way the author depicts himself. I've always found that people in general, when they draw themselves, tend to draw themselves better looking, and especially if they're men, they draw themselves very muscular even if they're skinny. I think that this is fairly pathetic but also healthy because it shows that they have the right idea in mind. They understand that if they were to be perfect, they would look like this. This guy drew himself skinny fat and ugly, which tells you a thing. It tells you that this guy gave up. He gave up on the very idea of bettering himself because he can't even gather the strength to draw himself looking good. So the panel says this: guess what? I could go to the gym too, but I'd rather read a book, draw a picture, play music, or talk with friends. I'd rather lead a curious life than a masculine one. And then in parentheses, in 50 years, we'll all be saggy, but he'll be saggy and boring. So that was for the comic. I hope you appreciate my efforts in dramatic reading. So this one is also a very famous comic, and many times non-lifters, normies, will link you this and say, hey, what do you say to that? Well, I have a lot of things to say to that, because just like the first tweet, it is completely idiotic. So the first thing we notice with this comic is that it's very similar in terms of sentiment to the first tweet, because it's the creation of a wimpy modern man, and you can tell immediately. You see, it is my belief that the productions of the spirit are a reflection of the body. I can tell in 1 second if the book I'm reading was written by a strong man or a weakling, just based on the ideas that are put in the book. It's the same with this. The comic, even if the guy didn't actually include himself, you would know that no strong man wrote this, no strong man created this, because of the ideas contained in it. Now the question is, why did someone take the time to make this? Well, just like with the first tweet, I think it can be traced back to resentment. I think that something happened to these dudes where they got humiliated by someone who was bigger than them, or they felt bad about themselves because they were compared with a man that was stronger than them. So they felt bad and they rushed home and they created something like this. And I think that's doubly ironical, considering that these are the very same people who claim that lifting weight is a waste of time. But spending time creating something like this just to feel better is not. There is no logic in this. There is only emotion. But to go back on this idea that weak men create weak media, weak content, and weak art, I also want to focus on the essence of this comic, because even though it's very poorly drawn and it is garbage, there is still something in it that connects to what modern art has become. I don't know if you've noticed, but modern art, for the most part nowadays, has become almost an ideological vessel. And the people that try to convey the ideologies with it are rarely strong men. The age of strong men who made statues and movies is far gone. Nowadays, the people who are part of the media, part of Hollywood, and have all of the power are for the most part weak men. And what do weak men do when you give them the power, when you give them cultural power? Well, again, they try to justify their own weakness, they try to feel better, and they also multiply that weakness because they inject it in every single piece of media out there, which is what has created this trend of trying to put down masculine men. Most movies nowadays, when you watch them, hate strong men and try to turn strong men into the butt of the joke. It started in the 80s and 90s, where the jock started becoming the bad guy. I don't know if you're aware, but there used to be a time where the jock was the good guy and the skinny dweeb that was incapable of being physical was the bad guy. And that was great, because it encouraged men to be more physically active. But because these very same wimpy kids became the people who made the movies, they started to paint themselves as the heroes and the jocks as the bad guys. And we have gotten to the point where recently I saw a movie, and I shit you not, within the first 5 minutes, there was already a scene that was put in the movie only to humiliate men, where they casted a very strong and masculine man on purpose, and they put him in a role that feminized him and made him look like a wimp. And I had to stop the movie because I was like, all right, this is propaganda. You are trying to feel better about the fact that you are a weak man by projecting your insecurity and trying to present strong men as being just as weak as you are. You have to be very careful in this modern age, because most media is like this. And it's very insidious, because if you're a young man and you're not aware of it, you're going to start to integrate the idea that it's bad to be masculine because masculine men are being made fun of. You need to reject that ideological propaganda as much as possible. And as I said, this is immediately visible in the comic, because in the first 2 panels, the guy who drew it tries to deconstruct the symbolics behind muscles. So he's trying to do what all of these idiots have been trying to do for decades now, which is to deconstruct masculinity. Now, stop for a second and think to yourself, why are these people doing it? Are they doing it because they feel deep down in their hearts that masculinity is dangerous or toxic, and they think that it would make a better world if we deconstructed men? Or is it maybe that this masculinity makes them feel bad because they're not able to match these standards, and therefore the easiest way for them to feel better is to destroy the standards and to force them to match their own mediocrity? The answer, of course, is the second. Any and every person I've ever seen that tried to deconstruct masculinity always had ill intent. They were not working for the benefit of men or the world, and for the most part, their goal was to poison culture and to poison masculinity because they were incapable of being men in the standard sense of the word, so they tried to just reinvent what it means to be a man. And in the comic, this attempt at deconstruction happens through the character of the female who says in the speech bubble that just because a man has muscle does not mean that a man has a strong character or would be an able leader. We're going to get back on this idea of the female because it's extremely important that it's a girl that thinks this. But to go back on the symbolics, that is of course very stupid. This idea is again mind-body dualism. It's the idea that you could be someone with man boobs, with a garbage physique and who smells like cheese, and yet be a great guy and be a great leader. And that is very nice in theory, but in practice, it's not the case. People who are fat and obese and unkempt and look disgusting for the most part are like this because their body matches their mind. The content of their mind created that body. And on the flip side, people who take care of themselves, who are physically active, who are in shape, who are groomed, who are making an effort to be well presented, to be clean, these people tend to also be healthy up there. And these are the people you want to associate with. For the most part, we all do that. We judge people based on their appearance because, to some extent, your appearance is a direct representation of your mind because it is created by your choices in life. We have a saying for that in French. We say, on a le physique de ses idées. A statement conveying the idea that just by looking at a man, you can sort of guess the way he thinks and the ideas he has about the world. This verifies itself in the realm of politics. It also verifies itself in the realm of anything relevant to human life. There is a reason why across history we always associated strong leadership abilities and virtue to muscles. All of the heroes of the past were very muscular and very strong. Why? Because it was accepted, and it's still true to this day, that all of these physical traits correlated with the ability to be a good leader, with the ability to be resilient, and to be someone that is highly virtuous. It is only this modern world that is trying to pretend that it's not the case for a simple reason, is because the modern men and modern humans in general are mediocre, and it shows with their body. So instead of fixing the body, what do people do? They try to insist on mind-body dualism by pretending that just because they look like crap does not mean that inside they are. But as we've established previously, that for the most part is untrue. This is why these people resent it, and this is why they try to deconstruct this ancient idea of masculinity. They don't like the idea that to be a man you have to be muscular and strong because they themselves are not that. So instead of becoming that through effort, they try to destroy the very standard. But the interesting part with that comic is who exactly is tasked with destroying the standard. You notice that the author made a woman do the dirty job. And that is so interesting. Psychologically speaking, I could make a 5-hour-long video on this comic alone because I think that the guy who made it is the perfect modern man. He represents everything wrong with it. So the reason why in this case it was a girl character that was deconstructing masculinity and trashing the bodybuilder is for an obvious reason. It's a clear projection of insecurity on the author's part. Why? Because the author deep down knows that women prefer men who are strong and men with muscles. So when he came home, when he got humiliated and cocked by a strong guy, and he came home, he was like, okay, to make myself feel better, I have to convince myself and the audience, not only that muscles don't make the man, but also that women don't like muscles. Is this going to change anything to reality? No, because as proven earlier and demonstrated, you cannot just switch and shape the physical world by denying its reality. Just because this guy made a woman say it in his comic does not change the fact that women like muscles. And why do they like it? Well, one, because it's aesthetic. Two, because of what it means. And that is the most important part. Women like muscles because of the traits and the character traits it conveys. Without even having to open your mouth, the girl is going to be able to tell that, one, you like hard work because you're willing to put in the work, you're resilient. When you have selected and elected to do something, you are going to put your mind into it, you're consistent, you're faithful to your hobbies, etc. All things that make you immediately attractive in the eyes of women. When that guy appears in the vicinity of a female, in the sight of a woman, what she sees is a fat slob, so someone who doesn't take care of themselves and is very unlikely to take care of them, someone who is not going to be able to protect them, someone who is most likely mentally weak because they're physically weak, all traits that women flee. They hate all of these traits. This guy knows that because the reality of this world taught him that lesson, but he refuses to listen. Instead, he hides away in the comfort of the spiritual world. He produces something to feel better, and more vicious, he creates an item that men who are just like him are going to cling onto so as to be able to continuously refuse the physical, make fun of the one thing that would make them feel better and be better, which is bodybuilding and lifting weights, which keeps them in a perpetual loop of mediocrity. And this is when we get into what I believe to be the most interesting part of this discussion. At this point, we've seen that putting all of your points on the intellect doesn't make you more intelligent, it just makes you less physically capable. We also see that doing this puts you at odds with the physical world, so it makes you also incapable of using this intellect that you're trying to cultivate. But now we're going to observe that even the little intellect that these people claim to have, they don't really have. The first tweet, for example, cited things like learning languages and reading poems, things that we now know the author wasn't really doing, or if he was doing them, he was doing them very poorly. So what exactly is the point of replacing, in his example, lifting with these activities? Well, I think the answer is fairly obvious. It's because these types are more interested in looking smart than actually being smart. Just like they prefer feeling better rather than actually being better. So they lose on the two fronts. They won't actually train because it's difficult, but they won't also do intellectual activities because trying to really apply yourself in that fashion is also difficult. And this is when we connect back to the idea of vanity. How many times have you heard people say, well, bodybuilding is vain because you only do that to have bigger muscles, so it's vain. Well, what if I do it for myself or to become a better man? That's not vain anymore. And if we look at the type of people who say these things, who memorize quotes, what exactly is the point of memorizing a quote? It's to shine in society, it's to look cool. That's vanity-based. That's entirely vanity-based in reality because it doesn't better you, and you don't even do that for your own sake. You do it for the sake of other people. And across the board, I have found that many of the people that claim to be intellectuals nowadays are exactly that. They're, in the strictest sense, pseudo-intellectuals. Now, I hear that term thrown around a lot. Whenever someone talks about philosophy or psychology, apparently they're a pseudo-intellectual. A pseudo-intellectual is someone who is an intellectual only on the surface level. They have no depth and they are not really able to convey anything intelligent. That, to me, is a pseudo-intellectual. And if you want to spot one, I have a few items I put on a list to help you distinguish between people who are smart and could be useful and people who just pretend to be smart because they think it makes them look good. So, example, people who claim to care about classical music, they are for the most part pseudo-intellectual. Classical music is something that you do for the soul, for the self. You listen to it by yourself. No one has to know. But by making people know, these people think, okay, classical music equals high class equals high intelligence, so this must mean that because I apparently enjoy that type of music, I'm more intelligent than people who don't. These, for the most part, are complete snobs and they have no intellect to speak of. Another easy way is people who announce their IQ. If you have ever met someone who told you their IQ, one, they lied. Two, they're not intelligent. Because someone who's intelligent would understand that IQ is just a number, it represents one facet of intelligence, and it means almost nothing at the end of the day. Another dead giveaway would be if they were t-shirts like this. I'm certain that you've noticed it from the start of the video, and you have many questions to ask. So yes, I did purchase and wear this t-shirt specifically for this video in particular. And no, this is not an excess. It's not what is the term that they use? A medium. This is a double XL t-shirt, right? I look like a cunt because it's super tight, but it's super tight for a reason. It's because the people who make that t-shirt know who their target audience is. They know that it's skinny men and fat dweebs. So what they did is they give me a ton of space around the stomach and no space for the arms. Even my neck, I'm being choked by this thing. If this item that I'm wearing on my body right now is not the perfect representation of what intellect has become in modern society, I don't know what is. Because who watches Rick and Morty? Who enjoys that show? Some people enjoy it because it's fun and wacky. But many people enjoy it because they think it makes them smart. Because they think that understanding the science-based jokes make them smart. I am not kidding. The stereotype exists for a reason. And these men are the exact type I'm talking about in this video. Because most of them would fit this t-shirt perfectly because they would be completely disconnected with the physical. I'm not going to go into a tangent right now, but look at the way the scientist is depicted in that show. Rick, who's apparently a god and the most intelligent person on earth. He's skinny, completely disconnected with the physical. Everything that he does with gadgets, which was entirely engineered on purpose. Because the people who made that show, I don't know if they're smart enough to realize what they've done, but they created a cultural icon, an item to be consumed by people who lack intelligence so as to make them feel better about their mediocrity. And the same goes for the tweet and for the comic that I've already produced. So we have gotten to a point where these people are less physically capable, emotionally unstable, and not even able to actually engage honestly with the type of intellectual content that they claim to be consuming, because they only really consume replacements that make them feel smart without them having to put in any effort at all. Which begs the following question. Since these people don't train and they don't actually engage with cultural items, what exactly are they doing with their free time? What are they doing with all of these hours that are not spending lifting or actually bettering their mind? Well, I'll tell you exactly what they're doing. They're consuming. These people are, for the most part, mindless consumers, just like the people who watch this show. This is the archetype that we're dealing with nowadays. These modern men are in very interesting psychological cases because they're so easy to read and they reveal so much about their cards just by their attempts at feeling better. So in the comic, the author couldn't stop himself from including the idea that he could go to the gym if he wanted, but he has better things to do. We've established that he has nothing better to do. He will not be productive with the time he doesn't spend in the gym. He will be a mindless consumer. But he still felt the need to let you know that if he wanted, he could. And I'm certain that if you lived, you have encountered that type. It's people who meet you, and upon seeing you, they feel bad because your physique alone is enough to make them feel bad and to make them realize that they messed up because they neglected something important. So they start making up excuses to your face. But these are not for you, they're for them. People who tell you, oh, I could, if I wanted to train, I could, or when I was your age, I look like you. All of that are lies, but it makes them feel better to say that. All of that is a dialogue to themselves, which again reveals the real reason why they never started training in the first place. It was never because they believed that it would make them more intelligent. Instead, it was because they take the easy way out. Always, this is their defining trait. It's an emotional trait. They avoid pain and they avoid effort. So lifting too difficult won't do it. Being actually smart and capable and reasoning too hard won't do it. Consuming, easy. I don't have to do anything to consume. I just have to sit back and be like this. There's no efforts involved in consuming. You just have to passively exist and that's it. But because deep down, this inactivity makes them feel bad, they spend the little energy they have trying to make themselves feel better, but more pathetic, trying to look better in the eyes of others. What I just described to you right now, my dear viewer, is the modern French man. This is Frenchmen to a T. This is all they do. This is all they spend their energy on. I spent 20 years in that godforsaken country, and I can tell you one thing. Masculinity is dead everywhere, but especially in France. Every single item points of this video applies to Frenchmen. So this is the part of the video where I shit on French people. So enjoy. It's going to be 5 minutes of just pure fucking bliss. And it's going to be just a way for me to just just a catharsis of sorts, just to extract that 20 years of suffering I had, being forced to live with people who are mediocre as fuck. So recently, I was listening to someone who I would deem a philosopher, and they said something very profound. They were talking about Frenchmen, and they said that Frenchmen throughout history were always the best at everything they attempted. That is true. And then he concluded by saying that they are even the best at mediocrity. And that blew my mind away, because nothing is more true than this. Frenchmen are so good at being mediocre, it's almost an art. You have never met more mediocre men in your life than men that you will get to meet in France. How did they get to such levels of perfection? Well, they did everything I described in this video. They reject the physical because they're above that, but they also are not intellectuals because it's too hard and they don't have the mental capacities. So they just consume, or they just mindlessly walk around and are unproductive and do nothing with themselves. The adjective that describes Frenchmen the best is stagnation, which is tragical because this is a country that dominated the world, okay? We own this fucking planet. A small-ass country, smaller than the state of Texas, we owned everything. We have the most military battles. We have the most capable leaders. Napoleon, for example, was a man of such vigor that he was pretty much a demigod. And look at us now. Look at what we became. Why did we become like this? Because of the mindset I've been describing in this video. The too smart to lift mindset. This is what has gotten to this point. And there is actually a word. There's a word in the French language that crystallizes everything I've been saying. French people that are watching right now already know what the word is. Because if you lift weight, another Frenchman, has tried to use it to make you feel bad because you lift weight. That word is gonflette. Gonflette is a word that exists in no other language. You will not find an equivalent in Spanish, in English, in Norwegian, even in German. Even the Germans don't have a word for that. Gonflette is the idea and the stupid notion that if you lift weight, so if you do a physical activity especially designed to get bigger muscles, then the muscles you will get will be full of air because it's not real muscle. This is what gonflette means. Now, anyone who understands anything about human biology understands that this makes no sense. If your muscles get bigger, it's muscle tissue, it's not anything else. Unless you inject syntho, it's muscle. But there are tens of thousands, even more, hundreds of thousands, millions of Frenchmen who routinely use that word to put down people who are trying to get better. Try to wrap your head around this. This was a word that has no other application. Its only meaning is this. It was literally invented by mediocre men to keep other men mediocre or to make fun of people who are excellent. If that is not the saddest thing you've ever heard in your life, I don't know what is. An entire word created for the sole purpose of making mediocre men feel better. Just like this comic and just like the tweet. Mediocre men will put in a lot of efforts to feel better, but they will never actually put in efforts to be better. And the reason why this is such a fucking shame is because by doing so, not only do they stay weak, but they encourage weakness in others. They poison masculinity and they poison culture. And this is what has happened to France. These people run rampant. They are completely unchallenged. There's a minority of excellent men and a majority of really mediocre ones. And this is why I've said it in the past and I'll say it again. Frenchmen are the wimpiest men on the planet. So this concludes the portion where I shit on my own people. I hope that one day they will be better. But until then, I will not be associating myself with their kind. Now, this connects to what I said previously, that people who are trying to put you down for lifting, they themselves are not spending their time doing anything relevant, so their word has no value whatsoever, because at the end of the day, the person who is wasting their time here is quite evident. And small tangent, this is also true for any hobby that you enjoy. I'm a lifting supremacist. I believe that lifting is very important and that every man should lift. But at the end of the day, if you do something in your life and it fulfills you and it makes you feel progress, it pushes you forward, and it makes you a better man, it cannot be called a waste of time. A waste of time is either something that keeps you stagnant or makes you regress physically, mentally, or morally. That's it. It's a very simple definition. But the funny thing with these types, these pseudo-intellectuals, is that they would never call chess a waste of time. Even though chess will literally take you thousands of hours of your life, it will devour your life. As the famous quote says, knowing how to play chess properly is the sign of a gentleman. Knowing how to play chess at a very high level is the sign of a wasted life. Why? Because chess is really the only thing you will do in your life if you want to be really good at chess. Would these types say that chess is a waste of time? No, because in their head, chess equals intellect equals good, so they would never make fun of it, even though it could be considered a waste of time. I don't believe it is, as long as it is your passion and something that you like to do. But if we were to look at fitness objectively, it brings many more objective benefits to your life compared to something like chess, for example, or learning a new language. Fitness keeps you living longer, it lengthens life, it improves your health, it boosts your mood, it boosts your will. It is quite literally the most important thing that a man can do in his life, and yet you have men who have lost sight of it. And this is the true tragedy of this video. At this point, we had a good time making fun of Rick and Morty fans and all of these idiots, but I really want us to recenter on what it means on a civilizational level, because we're losing people. And it is a shame because these are people who will never become the best version they could be. And as established with France, this is a risk. It's a societal risk because they are dragging the rest of mankind down with them. Their low moral fiber inspires more people to be low moral fiber. It's why, again, in the past, all of the heroes and the statues were strong, they had muscles, and they were virtuous. It was to show men a good example of what masculinity was supposed to be, to inspire them to become like them. But because, again, Hollywood and all of the movies have robbed us of our heroes and replaced them with garbage degenerates in the mainstream media, young men have nothing to look up for anymore. And this is why this really cultural battle has to happen with bodybuilders at the forefront. We are the ones who represent these values of physicality, and we need to reclaim them to ourselves and to the people that listen to us. Because keep in mind that there are agents outside of fitness that constantly attack us and encourage their audience, an audience that is not yet exposed to physical fitness, that it's a waste of time. And the best example of it is this Ethan Klein guy, a man who I think really exemplifies the mediocrity of the modern man. So listen to this. I'm only going to play the audio extract because from what I've heard, this fat slob likes to copyright strike videos that increase content. So listen to his melodious voice and I'll be right back with you.
Life's too short to exercise. I'm just going to be honest. There are so many better things to do than exercise. We have finite time on this earth.
So as you just heard, this pretty much summarizes all of the points I've already made. All of the excuses contained in the tweet and in the comics, this guy repeated, and that is not surprising at all. Mediocre men all have the same mind because they all have the same body. This is what mediocrity does to you. It shifts the way you perceive the world and you interact with it. For someone like me who rejects mediocrity, it's immediately evident. But if you're someone who is either mediocre yourself or are starting to accept mediocrity as a fatality, for the most part, you're not going to be able to perceive why these words are so poisonous. And it's because they appeal to your laziness. They appeal to the guy in you that just wants to chill, right? It's what this new generation likes to do, just chill. But what is chilling exactly? It's being stagnant, it's being non-productive, it's doing nothing important, and it's not bettering your character. Chill enough time and for long enough, and you will become like this guy. And if you take one look at his fat mug, his disgusting triple chin, and his manatee body, that should be enough. I should not have to convince you any further. You should lift on the simple basis that it's going to prevent you from resembling him. But it doesn't stop at the physical. The problem is what it does to your mind. And this is why this idea of mind-body dualism must die. If you train the body, it won't just make you bigger, it will also preserve your mind because it's going to save you from turning into an hedonistic degenerate like this dude. Training teaches you the importance of discipline. It teaches you how life actually works because it reconnects you with the physical. Spend enough time disconnected from it and you're going to start thinking that the action of lifting itself is a waste. And this is when you turn into a degenerate because if you turn your back to hard work, what is left for you? Well, things that are pleasurable. Consumerism, that is what is going to be left. This guy is the perfect example of that. He's someone who only chases pleasure, and anything that is going to stay in the way of him and his pleasures, he's going to push away as bad. And therefore, to prevent yourself from turning into that, lifting becomes the single most important thing that you can do as a modern man. Ethan is right. We only have so much time on this earth. So make sure that you actually spend it trying to become a complete man. Because if you don't, it's very likely that you're going to turn into a subhuman instead. And I'm going to leave you with that. Thank you for watching. Have a good night.